Hello and welcome to Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu, your interminable host for the next hour. Want to remind you quickly, KZSE wants to thank you for showing support during our fall fundraiser. Really, thank you so much. Thank you. 1/3 of our support comes from you, the listeners. My name is Dan Wu. You're listening to the show Unquestionable on KZSE Santa Cruz. It just has a great ring, and so let's keep it being in existence so we can keep saying that to you, that you're listening to KZSE Santa Cruz. And as a non-commercial educational radio station, KZSE supports free expression of ideas. Please be aware that the opinions expressed are those of the speakers or artists only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the UC Regents, KZSE staff, management, or underwriters. We welcome your feedback on our programming. Please direct your comments to the Program Review Committee at 831-459-4726 or by email at prc@kzsc.org. And I'd like to thank Do Make Say Think in the background. Pretty big time experimental jazz group that was cool enough to allow me to use their music on this show as the theme music. That's 1978 by Do Make Say Think. Beautiful yet drony enough to be in the background and support all the things that you get/have to hear me say. On today's show, starting it off, we have Dr. Ann Kenny on the line, author of Making Tough Decisions about End-of-Life Care in Dementia. And that book is out of Johns Hopkins Press in Baltimore. Ann Kenny is Professor Emerita at the University of Connecticut Health Center. She's currently practicing as a consulting physician and, as is apparent by her being on here to talk about her book, is now an author, or probably has been an author for quite a while. How are you doing there, Dr. Kenny?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So the book is called Making Tough Decisions about End-of-Life Care in Dementia. And tell me about how you first off decided to write this book. What was your inspiration for writing this book?
Okay. I'm a doctor of people who are older, and one of the big diagnoses as we get older is dementia. But that's not really what inspired me to write the book. My mother developed dementia, and as she was going through the ups and downs that brings, as a daughter rather than as a physician, I started seeing dementia from both the family side and the doctor's side, and found that a lot of the things I did as a doctor, limiting some of the care as people get further in their disease so that the end of their life is good and normal and fine, wasn't happening as I was journeying with my mother. So I thought, I'm one of the few geriatricians in the country, and my approach is different, but it's not getting out there. And so I thought if I wrote this book, it might give people an alternative to kind of the aggressive medical interventions in a disease we don't always recognize as a terminal disease. We can live very long and very well with it, but in the end, it is a one-way street and we do die from it, but we don't shift the focus of our care. So I thought this book would help have people have that perspective a little bit more easily.
That's great. I loved reading the stories about your family in this book, and also the many stories of other families, which you go to great detail to change basically all the details about the individuals so that they feel that their story is not being exploited or putting them on the spotlight maybe in their community, which is really interesting as a journalist, the lengths you went to change their names, their professions, and all of these things to be able to get the message across but not put anyone on the spotlight after dealing with a tragedy such as this. And I really...
Yes, the only one I didn't change was my mom and my siblings.
Awesome.
Or my children.
I actually... I didn't think about that consciously, but I did absorb that. And the parts about you visiting your mother in dementia assisted care facilities and the different stages of it really struck me when you were talking about your children interacting with her too, because I was in the position of being the only family member available full-time a few years ago when my grandma was suffering with aphasia, which is kind of in the family of dementia. And I could really relate to a lot of the stories that you were telling in here about the different points in the progression. And I wanted to ask about the relation to aphasia. People think of dementia as people losing their mind as far as like knowing who they are and things like that, but it's actually a range of diseases that fall under the name dementia, correct?
Correct. Dementia is kind of the umbrella term, and then there's several types of dementias under that. Alzheimer's dementia is the most common and the one we hear about a lot, like the movie Still Alice, or I don't know if anyone's seen the Glenn Campbell documentary. That's Alzheimer's dementia. There's a lot of, there are other dementias from strokes, mini strokes, from things like Parkinson's disease, or from having multiple head traumas like Muhammad Ali is another example. I'm sorry to hear about your grandmother, but aphasia is the inability to speak well. My mother had that as well. She had a mixed dementia. She had both Alzheimer's dementia and dementia from strokes. And the strokes took away her ability to speak earlier in her disease. So she could communicate with, I used to say with her eyebrows, she was like a maestro with those babies. She could communicate quite a bit, but not with her language as much. And it sounds like you had something similar with your grandmother. And that makes it unusual in our society, where we in the United States, where we depend a lot on our brains and communicating. And I think when somebody isn't able to communicate in that way, we often drop into our hearts a bit more and talk to each other a little bit more heart to heart. And it makes you stay more present to see exactly what's happening with the person in front of you. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't find that with you and your grandmother, that you had to talk to her in a whole new way.
Absolutely. It kind of makes you into a poker player or chess player with conversations, because verbal communication is the dominant form in the United States, and it's not everywhere. But here, when someone all of a sudden can't speak, or even as a young child, if a kid doesn't speak a bunch, we think there's something automatically wrong with them. So dealing with a relative who could have spoke in the past and doesn't anymore, it's a huge transition. And you talk a lot in here about the feelings of frustration and anger that can come up, and sadness and all of these things on both sides of that, for the person that can't speak and get their ideas across, but also for the person trying to help them, not knowing exactly what they're trying to get across. And you mentioned cancer as a contrast, whereas a cancer patient can generally tell us what kind of care they want and whether or not they want to continue with treatment, or they want to just have comfort care as they pass away. And you talk a lot about the difficulty and the unknown nature about how to deal with end-of-life decisions with someone who can't cohesively tell you what they want. Can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. I think you've summed it up really well, that as people progress through dementia, they do lose their memory, but they lose so many other things. Their ability to speak is the biggest, and to not have their voice, even in any way, they've kind of lost their ability to get through that deep thinking process. And so family members need to usually step in and make those decisions. Unfortunately, we often leave it to physicians. And physicians are trained to save lives. Medical school is all about making sure someone doesn't die. I used to have a resident I worked with who said, on my watch, they'll only die a Harvard death, meaning everything will be perfectly aligned. But the point being, that's how we're trained, is to keep people alive. And that's not necessarily the way everyone would want to be. There's a lot of people, for example, with cancer who are able to say, no, this treatment is too much for me. I don't want this anymore. This is futile. I don't want this anymore. And someone with dementia loses that capability. So what we have to do as family members is kind of evaluate what we think about death and dying, and we don't do that in the United States very well. We've kind of lost that part of living, that part of living is also dying, with the evolution of things like antibiotics and ICUs. But it is a time where you have to kind of sit back and say, what do I think about dying? What do I think about living well? And kind of do that inventory for yourself, and then redo that inventory for the person you're making the decision for. And if you don't actually understand what you think and then put it next to what they may think, you'll probably make a decision based on what you want. But our job is to make the decision for the person who can't make their own decision anymore, is to try to put ourselves in their shoes. And so that's difficult when you're doing it by yourself because you wonder, am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? And it gets a little frightening. But if you kind of think into their goals, what were their goals in life, it makes it a bit easier. When you have to do it as multiple family members, it could get very complicated because everybody's issues start to bump up against each other.
Absolutely.
And so, again, I think it's good for everybody to kind of sit in a group and talk about what their wishes are, and then everyone can see where they're coming from in their conversation and come back and say, but what would Mom, Grandma, my husband, my wife, whomever you're making the decision, well, what would they want? So that everybody can see, I have my own opinions, and this is how I interpret what their opinions would be. And you can see where you and they overlap, but where you don't overlap as well. I find those conversations easier once everybody acknowledges their own wishes and then starts to say, if I were in the other person's shoes, what would I do?
Now, as a geriatrician, you definitely have the chance to deal with a lot of these families and patients before they reach the latest stages and they can't speak anymore. And you talk about in here a concept, I think it's death over dinner talks. How do you encourage families that for either religious or superstitious or even just emotional reasons, they choose to leave death completely off the table? And how do you approach the idea that maybe they should talk about it in the mid stages when their patient relative can still speak about the issues? How do you approach that when it's a family that doesn't want to talk about it because there are legal issues that can arise if the person hasn't talked about it until after they can't speak, but still have the rights to themselves as a human being?
Right. I've found that you can't, I've tried. I've tried to just talk about it more bluntly and give facts and figures, and that never goes very well. So it has to be small, measured conversations. So planting seeds, asking a question and asking them to come back the next time with addressing that smaller question and kind of, and then expanding it to something a bit bigger, asking, what do you value? Like, what would you say your top 3 values are? Are they, and then they can tell me if it's their religion, and then I'll say, what is it that they're, it may be that 90% of people want comfort at the end of their life, but 10% of people do not, and sometimes it is due to religion. And then that's something we have to honor as well. But if it's a family member whose religion believes that, and the individual who's living with dementia who has different beliefs about what they would want, then I really encourage them to get a durable power of attorney. That's somebody who can make decisions for you when you can no longer make decisions for yourself. And that's a legal document that gets drawn up. And that's the person who has say over you. And what you want is that that's somebody who can align with what you say. So, for example, if your daughter does not believe in, has stronger religious beliefs that would be committing suicide to not take active treatment, say, for example, even though you think it's just getting out of the way of the disease and letting the disease run its natural course. You wouldn't want that daughter to be your decision maker. You'd want it to be someone else, somebody who's more aligned with you. And that's the beauty of having these conversations earlier in the disease so that you can say what your wishes are. You can also videotape or, you can document this as a rider to your advance directive so that advance directives tell us whether we would want our heart to be restarted if it's stopped or be put on a ventilator, whether we'd want a feeding tube, things like that. But you can also add, at the stage where I can no longer lift a fork to my mouth, I don't want anyone else to do it for me, or I only want them to put it up, and if I do not readily eat, I don't want that to be pushed.
Right.
Those kinds of decisions can be added to a legal document. They're so new in the literature that they haven't had a chance to really be challenged. But doing that and then making a video of it and having that archived with the person who aligns with you or with a lawyer can be or with your physician, can be very helpful, that your wishes are honored at the end of your life.
And a listener texted in about that very thing, about how palliative care, where it's not treating the disease to stop a disease or a condition, but just caring for someone comfort-wise while they pass away, is more compassionate. And you talk about the Harvard death, as you said. And in the book, you talk about how the modern medical industry is sort of built in this mission to abolish mortality, sort of.
Yes.
And as people grow older and are healthier, more and more people are ending up with these conditions that come on much more frequently when you're older. And now that we have people living to 80 and 85 and 90 more often, there are a lot more people. However, according to the American Council on Science and Health, the percentage of the people at that age with these conditions is lower. What do you see as that for the future? What do you see in that for the future, either strain or easing on the medical establishment and the emotional strain on families going into the future? Do you feel like this is going to be something that is easier to deal with or is going to burden the health system more? Having more people live to an older age, essentially.
Well, having more people live to an older age may help a bit because I think more people are working longer. So financially, it's a bit of a help. I think using people once they've retired to be active parts of our community would be helpful as well. So I see a lot of positives to successful aging or advanced aging. The downside is that a good proportion are developing these memory issues, and that does put a burden on the system. There hasn't been enough money put into prevention or research around Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, but there is some science on the horizon that may show some benefit for actually slowing the disease, if not potentially preventing it. We're probably still 10 years out of that, maybe 20. So there still will be a large group of people who are living with dementia until they die with it. I think a shift to allowing people to make their own end-of-life choices. Most people do not dread death as much as they dread being a burden or being disabled in a cognitive way from a stroke or dementia. If you ask most older individuals, they would prefer to find a different exit from this planet than doing it via something like a stroke or dementia. So I think if we can allow individuals to have that voice and to let something like a pneumonia or the change in appetite and not get in the way of that and allow that to and provide them comfort care, I think we wouldn't have as much burden on the system.
And you mentioned how a lot of bankruptcies at the end of life are caused by huge medical bills trying to treat conditions that ultimately end up taking the person's life anyways. How do you address that concern with people, both the families and the patient, while they're still able to talk about those things? Because some people, I have a relative right now that definitely wouldn't want to maintain their life for an extra year. They've made that choice in cancer. If it meant, spending all the money that they've worked for all their life, considering that they feel like they've had a really good life at this point. And how do you approach those conversations, and what are the most common reactions you get from people when you talk about the financial side of continuing possibly futile care?
Okay. I usually, again, address that through a value conversation. When I ask someone in front of their family members what they value, sometimes they say they value their legacy, that they want to leave something besides their opinions for the people that they think it's too much money. Usually family members get upset saying, no dad or no honey or whatever, we want you around. And then I say, but, at what cost, at what price? And not just financial cost, but at what price and then we kind of get back to, is it just about the money, or is it also about how much quality you would have in that year or 2 years or whatever? And once we can go with values and quality of life, I think most people can see that just being on this planet isn't always the best way forward. And sometimes it is. But that's what the discussions will bring up. So we usually get around to legacy, values, and quality of life.
And again, to remind listeners, you're listening to Unquestionable on KZSE Santa Cruz. I'm Dan Wu, speaking with Dr. Ann Kenney, Professor Emerita at University of Connecticut Health Center, and also the author of Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care and Dementia. She has been a geriatrician for decades before writing this book, and then went through being on the other end of it with her mother passing away, and she's now written this book helping other families deal with decisions relatives and patients have to make when they have conditions within the umbrella of dementia, which includes Alzheimer's and other conditions. Are there any mistakes that you feel, not regrets, but anything that you would have done different with your mother's care, maybe that you've learned through all the conversations with families since then, or things that were just like, oh, why did I get in that argument with her, or something like that? I know I have those feelings with my own grandmother.
Oh, absolutely. I was definitely not the best caregiver. I had some struggles with my siblings on some decisions as we went. I come from a pretty big family, and I wish I would have been more compassionate during those. I may have pulled my doctor card, and I do regret that. And so when we were having family conversations, I think we finally got to a place where we all tried to acknowledge each other's points of view, and we didn't all do that at the same time. So I regret that a bit. I think my biggest regret was that I didn't reach out for more help sooner. Caregiving is a wonderful but taxing job. I don't know if it's not really a job, but and many people are willing to help, but it's our American way to be mavericks and go it alone, or and this is not a time to go it alone. It's better for everyone involved the more you reach out for help. So asking family members to help, asking friends to help, people love helping, and it benefits the person living with dementia for having some variety in their day. It benefits you to take care of yourself. To the risk of slipping into anxiety or depression is really quite high in those who are giving care. And a lot of that is because there is that, am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? The stress that goes with the actual burden of the day-to-day. It's a marathon. Dementia can last for up to 15 years, 20 years in some people. And while the person living with dementia doesn't need 24-hour care that entire time, they do need it for a big chunk of time. And it can be wearing on the person who's there for them.
Right. And what would you say is your target audience for this book, or the group of target audiences that you would like to see this book making tough decisions about end-of-life care in dementia? It's definitely laid out with goals and reviews at the end of each chapter, which make me think it will be in classrooms. But who else would you like to be reached by the message in this book?
Well, I guess I never thought of it in classrooms much. That would be, I think, even...
Oh, interesting. I really saw that in there. Okay.
I'm glad. I think I laid it out for people who are current caregivers. I also hoped that maybe those who were newly diagnosed with dementia might use it also to start to develop some of their end-of-life choices earlier on. I was hoping that the stories would make it approachable enough that it wouldn't be too frightening. And I do hope that some healthcare providers read it so that they can see that there's an alternative way to just having somebody come into the hospital at the end of their life and sending them back and having them come back 2 months later, and as a way to begin some of those tougher conversations for physicians to have about, we are approaching the end, and maybe this book could help you have that conversation with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Ann Kenny. John Hopkins Press. The book is Making Tough Decisions About End-of-Life Care. Dr. Kenny has been a geriatrician for decades, 2 decades?
About 30 years now.
30 years, and also is a professor emerita at the University of Connecticut Health Center. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I will have this episode podcasted for anyone that heard it and thinks someone else wants to hear about this topic and could benefit from it. And thank you so much, Dr. Kenny, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Awesome. Have a great day, and we will be back in just a moment with more of Unquestionable. We'll talk some local issues going on post-election. Let's just say it's election season again, because it never ends in the United States, right? Why can't we get 6-week runoff elections that are just insane like the Brits and the French and the Canadians do? What barbarians. Anyways, we will be back in a moment. Thank you again to Dr. Ann Kenny for being on the show. And you're listening to Unquestionable, KZSE Santa Cruz. Here's my other favorite theme music, Mirrors by Homebrew. We'll be back in about 1 minute.
I am a coward, going blindly like a sow. I am a rainstorm, infinity falling down. Came to prop up others, but I'm drooping, can't stay still. I'm weak as some progress, can't escape from myself. Break all the mirrors, don't be afraid of bad luck, 'cause it's the only kind we have here. Break all the mirrors, don't be afraid of bad news, 'cause it's the only kind we have here. It's easy to pass judgment when you're first starting to live all on your own. No, you're not alone, you're just not leaning on the wall. I am a skunk repelling everything I find, searching, not finding any shred of peace of mind. Is it courage to boldly admit 'cause I'm no better than you. Are you better than me? 'Cause I'm no better, no better.
Thank you so much for Ducky with the wonderful vocals in the background. Shout out to my journalism mentor and professor for way too many years while I figured out what I was supposed to do in my life. Thank you because of the caller that just called in who just boosted my ego. Speaking of being better than people, I just got a huge boost of ego from a caller in at 831-459-4036 who said I should be doing this for a larger audience and also said they don't agree with all of my opinions, which was really cool. And they said that I'm good at arguing with people in a way that makes him want to listen to it. And that's my whole goal in life when I'm on the radio or off the radio. I just want to argue with people and have them listen to me. It's a horrible disorder. But who knows? I might end up in Southern California at some point where even if I'm mediocre, I could probably still find an audience because there's like a zillion people down there. But we'll see what happens with that. First off, couple announcements. Meals on Wheels of Monterey Peninsula was founded in 1972 and hosts programs to support the health and independence of people in Monterey County. Home-delivered meals provide nutritious meals to frail, elderly, and disabled adults who cannot shop or cook for themselves and who have no full-time caregiver in the home. The program includes a daily wellness check and socialization, respite for families, and help to individuals recovering from surgery. More information is available online at MOWMP. That's for Meals on Wheels, Monterey Peninsula, I would guess. MOWMP.org. And also founded in 1972, what a year for food. Second Harvest Food Bank, Santa Cruz County, was the first food bank in California and is the second oldest in the nation. Maybe the oldest active. I feel like during the Depression, there's probably other food banks. That's just a guess. Don't hold me to it. Anyways, Second Harvest Food Bank's been around since 1972, and they work to end hunger, malnutrition, and educate and involve the community. They offer bilingual nutrition education, CalFresh outreach and application assistance, and county-wide food assistance referrals. A variety of volunteer opportunities are available. More information is available online at thefoodbank.org and by phone at 831-722-7110. You're listening to Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu. It's the second Monday since the demise of the election season, and this is the United States. So the election season's never really over. About a dozen Democrats have already announced they're running for president in 2020. Our president has been having campaign rallies, whether or not that's legal, for the last 2 years. Wherever he can find a positive audience, he usually turns everything into a campaign rally. But there were a lot of local issues on the ballot this time around, especially for a midterm election. A lot of times people will save those for the main elections when they feel they can get the most voters out. An interesting thing happened with 48 races that a certain journalistic, I think it was the LA Times, my apologies to get that wrong, but I don't have the article in front of me, but the LA Times, I believe, is the one that printed an article tracking 48 different high-profile propositions throughout the country. 42 that had the most money put into them, regardless of the issue, the demographic they were targeting, any of those things. The issue with the most money won. The side with the most money behind their advertisements won 42 of 48 of those races. So I have a new strategy to feel good during election time. If elections are getting you down, just make a small donation to whichever side has the most money. put on your Yankees cap and say, go get them. I just say that because the Yankees have a lot of money. But my friend heard that strategy and he said, you're going to probably support a lot of evil causes. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. I guess sarcasm's a dangerous thing. Thanks to Gary for texting in. You can also text in at 831-459-4036. I will also be brave enough to take your calls on the air here for the next 15 minutes that I have of talk left, because I got 2 tracks I want to play at the end here as sort of catharsis post-election tracks. I want to talk about what's happening tomorrow in Santa Cruz, though. Tomorrow, Santa Cruz City Council will be meeting. It's one of their last meetings before they disband. 4 of those members of the 7-member council will be going on to the next term because they were not up for election. 3 of those members, however, are going to be new come 2019. Yes, it's 2019 almost, folks. There will be 3 incoming city council members, which means they're going to be talking about the rent freeze tomorrow at the Santa Cruz City Council. The rent freeze was put in place earlier this year in the spring because the community was discussing rent control, and conversations like that can cause instability. I guess disstability is not a word. Instability in the marketplace, and people ratcheting up rents in fear of rent control coming in or evicting people to sell their homes. So the rent control freeze was put in while we discussed Measure M. However, there's a new city council coming in, and a very interesting thing happened. At least one of the members on the ballot that strongly supported Measure M is going to be on the city council, and 2 other members on the city council support rent control fairly strongly. And there are 3 candidates right now within 200 votes of each other. Drew Glover, Greg Larson are 210 votes away from each other, with Rochelle and Orion right in the middle, almost tied with Drew Glover at 6 votes ahead of him. And there are a lot of people that want to go to that city council meeting tomorrow to just let the city council know, hey, maybe we should let the rent freeze stay in place to provide stability to the community and the marketplace for the next 2 months, considering that some of these city council are on their way out. Maybe it's not the best time for them to make decisions that will have immediate and far-ranging effect on the community. Not to say they were voted out or anything. Cynthia Chase decided not to run again. This is nothing against the city council on my part. I don't think on the part of the people that want the rent freeze to stay in place either. What I've heard from them is that they just want to have some stability put in place before the new city council comes in, given the fact that there was one sentence I heard continuously during this last election season in Santa Cruz was, I believe that rent control is not a bad thing necessarily, and that something needs to be done, but Measure M just isn't right and it has a lot of flaws. Now is the time that those people can make good on their word and help others just keep some stability in the marketplace for a minute longer. In our lifetimes, 2 months is a minute. And just let the rent freeze stay in place for 2 months while the new city council comes in and does what a city council does, proposes and discusses legislation, negotiates on it, which is what the Measure M opponents kept telling me was their goal. They wanted the city council to pass something. The city council has not passed anything in my entire lifetime. in the form of rent control or even rent stabilization or relocation assistance. But now's their chance to make good on their statements of saying that they do support some form of rent control or some form of regulation or stabilizing effect on the housing economy in Santa Cruz. Tomorrow, City Council, Center Street, Santa Cruz. The City Council will be meeting. It is the existing City Council, not the incoming one. And it's really important that people of all viewpoints go out tomorrow and speak their minds and let them know what you think about it. But Santa Cruz is still one of the most unaffordable places in the world when you combine the cost of living and the available commonly found wages in the area. San Jose is now the most unaffordable place in the nation to buy a home. Isn't that where all the money's coming from? How did that happen? How did San Jose, where all the money is, and it's basically the new financial capital of the world, you know, in addition to New York and London, maybe Tokyo and Paris, Mountain View and San Jose and San Francisco definitely have earned their place in there with the elite financial cities of the world. I dare anyone to challenge me on that fact. A lot of the money has come from London and Paris and New York and Saudi Arabia, but that does not change the fact that a lot of that money is here now, and that money is not being shared with the multitude of the people. The thing that I would say is the most egregious part of the housing situation it's far-ranging, between Sacramento and Santa Rosa, all the way down to Carmel and Gilroy, and that whole square of space in between, is the thing that the real estate community keeps denying. They keep saying that housing is simple supply and demand. However, it's something that everyone needs. Simple supply and demand works if you sell t-shirts that are really cool and then you make them limited edition and people pay $150 for your t-shirt. That's awesome. More power to you. But that t-shirt does not cause the price of everything in the community to rise. That t-shirt can exist in an economy effect of its own, and the people who want that t-shirt either spend a lot of money on it or they don't. However, housing makes everything go up. So when one cost of something that everyone needs is rising in an inordinate contrast to inflation, it causes the price of everything to go up inordinately and causes artificial inflation. So the falafel hut would have to charge you $1 more, maybe 10% more for your falafel plate. Delicious, awesome, love it, great service to the community. However, they probably don't own their building because of the way that property laws are skewed in California towards property owners' benefits. Almost every business rents their property, and the housing costs going up cause the building owners to then raise the rents even on retail and commercial businesses to the point where they have to raise the price on their products to pay for their own housing. And then you end up with a situation where in the Bay Area, at San Jose and all these places, they're talking about possibly having communities where firefighters and cops, even the higher paid civil servants, people that we really want to know our community and probably be nearby if they're on call in an emergency, can't live in the community and have to drive through 40 minutes of traffic from, say, Stockton or Concord to get over to San Francisco, or Gilroy and Salinas to get over to Santa Cruz or San Jose. And these are choices that the real estate community really needs to weigh heavily when they think that they own property, it's rising in value, people are moving here, and that's the end of the story. It's not the end of the story. This creates artificial inflation, and I really, really, really hope people show up to that Santa Cruz City Council meeting tomorrow, Tuesday, Center Street, Santa Cruz. Whatever your view is, can get in line, take your 2 minutes, and be as civil and as good as an example of whatever movement you stand for to speak up, because that's what I'm going to be doing. I will be stepping out of my role. And I'm not sure if I worded this in a way that's good for the rules of this place, but I'm saying that if I had a strong view on rent increases, housing prices, the course of the migration in the community, I would definitely show up to that meeting tomorrow. But that's just me. I got a couple tracks by Idea that I want to play. One of my favorite rappers in a couple minutes. But I do have 3 minutes left if someone wants to weigh in on whether they think the rent freeze should stay in place until the new city council comes in. Because if they do let it expire, we will have at least 2 months of no rent regulation in sight, but also the looming prospect of rent regulations to come, which could scare people into making rash decisions with their properties. And this is something that should be taken quite seriously by everyone in the community, whether you're a homeowner, a landlord, a property management company, a real estate company, a tenant, a parent, is really something that should be paid attention to. The issues don't go away because of the election being over. And I understand why Measure M may have not passed by some really well-intentioned people. This is not to demonize anyone that disagrees with me. This is to say that that bill was a very wide-ranging bill, and it was kind of a wish list bill. So I feel the need of some who favor some forms of rent control to not have voted for it on the fact that it may have been too much all at once and they want to see the city council take that issue up. However, the city council then needs to step up and probably do that. And I like a lot of the city council that are opposed to Measure M. I like them a lot. I've had them on my show. I see them around town. I've been in this community my whole life. And even though I disagree with many in the property owning class, my family also owns some property here. I don't make my living off of rent checks. I pay rent myself. But I have a really cool landlord and he's been really good to me. So I feel like I'm really speaking up for people that have been moved out of this community at fast rates. And when people throw the inventory argument at me, they say, oh, well, we just need to build more houses. Well, it's very interesting because a lot of the people in charge of this city's decision-making for a long time have been people that bought houses when they were cheap and then decided to preserve the natural beauty of the place by not building more houses. Now their houses are worth a lot of money and they don't want to have any regulations on what they charge for it. It was a very interesting series of events that happened there. But tomorrow, Tuesday, City Council, Santa Cruz, Center Street, a lot of S sounds. One of them is a C. A couple of them are C's. City Council, Center Street. Tomorrow, Tuesday, here's Idea and Abilities with the song Junk, talking about maybe the disorder that many in our current government and entertainment industry suffer from. Idea is one of my favorite rappers. And then I got a little melancholy Keep the Hope song coming up after that, and we will be out of here. Thank you so much for listening to Unquestionable. I'm Dan Wu. This has been a pleasure to be with you again. I'll be back next Monday with more. Dan.whoop@gmail.com or Daniel Wootan, WOOTAN. If you would like to pitch ideas or guests or frustrated messages or happy messages to me, I welcome all of it. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you later.